Okay, hi guys, welcome back to This is an IT Support Group. We're here again, joined by Lewis Pope, head nerd at Enable, regular guest here on the stream. We're going to be talking about cybersecurity today. We'd love to have your questions sent in, send us any information that you might want to hear from, throw us any questions to Lewis. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to answer. We're going to be talking generally about cybersecurity today, some events that we've seen going on recently. Lewis, do you want to just do a quick intro as usual and who you are, what you do?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me back again, Ed. So for anybody joining for the first time, I'm Lewis Pope, one of the head nerds over at Enable. Very much my role is education and advocacy, very much so around cybersecurity best practices, helping MSPs and IT professionals with the dirty work of security controls and implementation, all of the not fun stuff that still has to be done. So I spend a lot of my time just dealing with how do we contend with the fact that our juniors are walking around and setting up administrator credentialed shares in environments? How do we deal with the fact that we have no way of monitoring something as simple as RDP enabled? So I spend a lot of time helping with those practical day-to-day security challenges.
Wonderful. So should we just jump into the first question?
Sure.
Well, there was a major incident that actually impacted the MSP and IT channels quite recently. At the beginning of the month, I believe, Ingram Micro was hit with an attack that forced them to take down internal infrastructure, and their billing and distribution site was unavailable for a few days. So what actually happened there?
Yeah, so this was on July 5th, I believe. Ingram Micro, so if anybody's not familiar with Ingram Micro, because they're not a distributor you're using, they are an IT distribution giant. Whether it's hardware licenses, anything and everything in between, this is what a lot of IT shops and a lot of MSPs rely on as their distributor for equipment and for licensing. They were compromised through by the Safe Pay ransomware group. Yeah. Apparently it was just a compromised credentials, VPN access, get into the environment, start causing damage. They had to bring down their internal networks for about 4 days. There were knock-on effects with their distribution and their billing platform. So this was a great example of supply chain compromise, where the compromise led to denial of access rather than to compromise of data and data exfiltration, well, as far as we know at the moment. But this is I think this is really good for MSPs and for IT pros to kind of think about is we do get a lot of pressure to operate kind of in the just-in-time model of you don't buy licenses unless you need licenses. You don't buy equipment until you need the equipment. There's no reason to keep a backlog of items or spares of items. It's just, we can get them in 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. That's plenty enough. But stuff like this can happen. And for your high risk environments, for your clients that can't wait for you to figure out how you're going to get them one more license for that person that just started work yesterday for M365, or you can't buy those new laptops that you're going to need for the sales team that's going to be getting onboarded. And now your inability, because they're your primary source, you now have to spend a lot of time and effort panicking, trying to find, where you can buy stuff. Everybody kind of experienced this after COVID with supply chain impacts where, it's like, okay, we're back to refurbishing systems to make ends meet for a while there. And I think this is just one of those, you have to be prepared with backups for everything. If you get your licensing and your equipment from one location, you need to have a fallback somewhere else. Who is the other supplier? Sure, you might not be getting as good of a deal from that, but you're in a pinch, and that premium payment you're going to have to make for that access in the moment is, is going to be worth it. Also, this is just, great example of how this cascades. This is something that could have affected Ingram, and then that could have affected an MSP, but then that's going to affect the clients of the MSP that have their own projects running, and that's pushing deployment times back. And all of a sudden, something that happened to Ingram is impacting a small business in the middle of Minnesota, because they're not going to be able to get the hardware they need for 3 weeks instead of 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think it's kind of it turns into a cascading effect on the entire industry, and I think that even names you haven't heard before, if something happens to any manufacturer or anyone in that supply chain or that link,
yep,
the whole industry just goes boom like dominoes, just consistently crashing down. And I think that's why it's really important to highlight all of these issues, because this is not the first or the last time something like this is going to happen.
Right. Yeah. And some people will say, well, how are we supposed to know? How are we supposed to think of this as a possibility that something could have happened? And I'm always like, that's what threat modeling is for. That is what proper risk management and creating a risk register for a business is. And that's another one of those for a lot of MSPs and IT pros. That is a tool gap or a capabilities gap there. That just something as simple as spending the time to formally write the stuff down, and making the business aware and cognizant. And here is the threat. Here's the threat. We've quantified it. We've qualified it. We've shown what it can do to us, and we've shown what we can do to prevent it. For you as the IT individual, sure, they may say we're not going to do anything about it, but you did your part of the job. They get to make the business decision, but you've, ethically, due care, due diligence, you've presented it out as issues that should be thought about and addressed.
Certainly, yeah. I think it's definitely something that we should keep an eye on in the MSP industry, and it's as you say, it is literally something that most people do not think about. And you're normally there dealing with your customers and their needs, and you have set requirements. You've configured certain licensing. You've got all of the numbers in play. You're working with what you've got, and you just have to look slightly outside of the box and think about, okay, what would happen if any of these suppliers that we use were to not be here tomorrow? What is the contingency plan? What can we do about this? Do we have any alternatives? That should be included in your business model and your threat modeling.
It absolutely should. It should be every single process that you are a part of. You have to ask the question, if this process breaks, how do we respond to it? Because I always say your team needs to be able to respond with urgency, not panic. And they're never going to be able to do that unless things have already been thought through and practiced.
That's certainly it. So there was another ransomware attack. That's the thing of nightmares for MSPs. A compromise of an RMM tool, which is basically the Bible of being an MSP. You're going to use RMM tools in your work. What happened there?
Yeah, so this is one of those situations of that worst case scenario that MSPs do always worry about is, I'm the problem. What happens whenever I'm the one that gets hit? And that's going to cause the problems that's going to cause for you, reputational damage, loss of revenue for your clients, reputational damage for them. It's a horrible thing. You never want to get into it, but it's always, again, you have to think about it and you have to think your way through it. And I think this is one of those great situations of, you need to go and read through this if you are an MSP, because you need to say, identify where, are we doing this? Or are we not doing this? Is this what would have happened to us in this situation? But this one was an MSP was hit, Dragon Force ransomware group. This is another one of those, not necessarily very talented, or I want to say talented, better, not nation state backed capabilities. This is standard tooling, ransomware as a service type capabilities. But they did take advantage of a vulnerability in Simple Help RMM. So Simple Help RMM, they found the vulnerabilities were found. They were addressed back in January. So this is a situation where this particular MSP had a vulnerable RMM in play that was taken advantage of and compromised by a set of threat actors. Once they got in, they got that initial access to the platform, and they used that to hit multiple downstream customers. They did reconnaissance, moved laterally, within the client's environments, deployed ransomware, likelihood of data exfiltration as well. Whether that's currently discovered or not, it's always you have to kind of assume until you can prove otherwise that they did. But it is an absolute, take the lessons learned from it. This is a 5-month delay, 4-month delay on a patch being available and it not being applied. So that's one of those, you shot yourself in the foot, but you have to, why? If this would happen to you, why would it also happen to you? How would you prevent this from happening? Would you be, do you make the transition over instead of a hosted solution that you're responsible for maintaining and keeping up? Do you switch over to a platform as a service where you're not having to maintain the versioning and everything? It's taken care of for you and you kind of wash your hands of it? Do you build up no, we're going to continue to use this. So now here's our new, standard operating procedures. Here's our reminder emails we're going to set up to pester us to remind to check it. Here's our weekly audit checklist, whatever it is going to be, how you're going to address it. How do you make sure that you're not leaving the keys to the kingdom vulnerable because you weren't, for lack of a better way of saying it, you weren't paying attention?
I think that's kind of any tool that you use, especially RMM tools. You have to look at the risks as well as the benefits from each tool. And it's very easy, especially as a smaller MSP or a smaller company in the entire IT sector, it doesn't matter what you're doing, when you're using these tools and you're giving them data, you have to consider, what is the plan if this goes horribly wrong? How quickly can we remediate this problem? And is there any operational benefits or backup solutions where, in the event of an emergency where you have to pull away and disconnect that, can you quickly change the information that was available to that tool, protect and lock down your systems, and protect all of your customers as well? Do you have any advice maybe for MSP owners that are listening on how we can remediate these kind of problems for them, even the smaller people?
So one of the primary things you should always figure out for every single tool that you use that has the ability to issue commands to an endpoint or provide access is you really have to, out the gate, always think of the fact of it's probably going to be vulnerable someday, some way, somehow. Just out the gate, make the assumption. Also, know what your tools communicate on. So you should absolutely have a operational playbook, a incident response playbook somewhere where the title is RMM compromise. And in there should be listed out, all right, how we're going to respond. And some of the things that should be in there is, all right, how do we disable any necessary user accounts? How do we, what are the IP addresses that are used for communication? And how are we going to push that IP address as a block item through ACLs or whatever else we're going to do it through out to network equipment or out to a DNS filtering solution? Are we going to maintain secondary channels of control? back whenever MSPs were just starting to get rolling in early 2010s, there was always the back and forth and the should you or shouldn't you on having two remote desktop tools. You would have, all right, so you were going to use this one as your primary, and then you'd use this other one, and whenever the primary broke, and then there would be people to say, well, I don't want to use two. I just want to pick the one that always works. And it's like, but that's the thing, is someday, no matter what, one of them will not work and you need it. So they're still like, but of course that expands your attack surface. Nowadays, you have your RMM tools, but then you also have your EDR tools that also have the ability to issue commands to endpoints. Even your agents for your XDR solutions also have that capability nowadays. So having an understanding and knowing the hierarchy of the tools that are in play, and can we use, if one tool is compromised, can we use the other tool to harden or mitigate with? So one tool is compromised. Well, let's go to the other one and use it to issue kill process commands, things like that.
I think that's kind of, I wonder, it's kind of that culture that's especially when a lot of MSPs are kind of centered around Microsoft products, for example. They learn that most of the business and most of their customers are surrounded with a certain number of applications and services and one operating system. That kind of encourages that culture of sort of, this is what we're working with. And I think that kind of expands into getting other tools into the play as well, even RMM tools in this situation. It's like, let's just use this tool, and then that's amazing. That's great. We're a small business, as an example. So we're going to stick with this RMM tool. It's going to work like it does with Microsoft and all the other platforms we use. And it only becomes a problem when it becomes a problem. And I think that is kind of what we're saying here, is build this into your business plans, into your internal policies in terms of your third-party tooling, and anything that you can integrate that's part of your business, a crucial part of your business. We should be thinking, what if this doesn't work tomorrow?
Right. Yep. You need the my documentation system's down. I still need to have access to mission critical contact information. I still need to have a printed copy of our incident response playbook. I still, and I have always been a big proponent of, you need a printed copy and your clients need a printed copy. That seems so, for some, that seems like extra. It seems like, well, I've got there's just too much information and documentation. That is true in some cases. You may be supporting clients, your operations may truly be that big that, you're not going to print out a 300-page incident response playbook. Then you need to create the playbook for IT systems are down, and we need to restore everything. And here's all the mission critical information we need for whenever everything is down.
Certainly. So I think we'll move on to network equipment and VPN vulnerabilities, which there has not been a lack of this year. It seems like each month brings more security bulletins from vendors to patch now, or even to decommission and pull equipment out of service because the vulnerability actually can't be patched out. Is this a trend that's going to continue, especially when we look at kind of the effects of AI and network attacking, and in play with red team, blue team? Is it just going to be bots fighting each other? And is this equipment ever going to be recoverable? What can we do here?
Right. Yeah. So there's always the issue of, well, every system when it's created, doesn't matter what it is, there will be vulnerabilities in that system that can be exploited. Somebody just has to find it one day.
Yeah.
And vendors, everybody should kind of just accept that's the nature of the beast. That is why we have to have vulnerability management practices, and why why vulnerability management life cycle is a thing. Well, change management is a thing, is because we just have to deal with this is the way it is, and we have to do what we can. So no, it's not going to go away. There will be changes. There will be, maybe there will be The vendors themselves become more secure in their practices because some of the things that they have been, some of the issues from this year, some of them have been hard-coded credentials, some of them have been off of decisions to, continue to use certain Linux distros or kernels. So there's a lot of vendors made poor decisions, which resulted in. But even whenever they don't make poor decisions, there still can be vulnerabilities that are going to be found in systems. Cisco being one for Citrix Bleed 2. I think that's one of the bigger ones I would be concerned about at the moment, because this is one of those. As soon as they announced it, the CISA here in the US immediately said, yep, everybody, you got 24 hours to patch this. And usually, they'll add to their known exploited vulnerability catalog. Usually they'll add something to it and it'll have, patch in 13 days, 24 days, something like that. But this is one they just turned around and said, no, 24 hours. And that's because there's no mitigations for this. The only way to deal with it is to patch the systems. And it's a combination of, I think it's 2 vulnerabilities together that constitute the Citrix Bleed 2. And it allows them, an attacker, to, it's a remote attack, full remote code execution, compromise the systems, capture session tokens. They can do what they want, almost.
Completely
they can do what they want at that point. So if you're using NetScaler or Gateway from Cisco, this is a priority 1 item. You absolutely should be, checking on all of those systems. So, and that's how do I respond to this question I get sometimes is on, well, a vendor has something major that happens. How do I know that it's happened? What should I do about it? How do I know what to do about it? And there's just no substitute for, first, what people always hate to hear is assets inventory. Without asset inventory, you don't know. And the first thing your team has to do is figure out if and where. The if and where question is not something you should ever be trying to figure out whenever you're reading through a security bulletin. It should be a, yes, I already have the list and I can go check it. And those lists should, be firmware versions. It should be a living documentation system. So as, whether it's being dynamically generated and updated through integrations and tools, or if it's just manual auditing, whatever it is, you need to know these are the versions of network equipment we have, the versions of this firmware on them. How do we monitor? How do we push? And again, you can't do it. You shouldn't be trying to do it in the middle of the panic. It needs to be done ahead of time. For internal IT, it's kind of, that's your busy work. That's your, no major projects in the moment. Let me go back through and make sure, my inventory's good and, you can keep up with it. For MSPs, it is a lot more of a challenge, and you really can't do it without the tooling to support and assist you with it. So your RMM tools, they can do a lot of this for you. But you sometimes have to rely, sometimes your RMM tool is not going to be enough and you need more than one tool. The dreams of single panes of glass will never come true. So if you're still waiting, trying to find an RMM tool that can do everything, don't keep waiting. Take the one that does the most that you like and start there.
I think that's solid advice. So we've got Citrix Bleed 2 exploitation up here. This is kind of the one that you were just mentioning.
Yeah.
We've got the CVE codes down there. For anyone who wants to go ahead and check these out, we will put the links and share them after the live stream, but I'll just put one in the chat as well. So we've got Citrix Bleed 2 and NetScaler was the other one we were going to talk about, the critical security updates that were just issued on the 11th.
Yeah. And those are, and those 2 links will be 2 good ways of looking at this. And I wanted to have those 2 because one is a security researcher and one is more vendor messaging. So it's always, take the time to find, yes, you should absolutely be subscribed to your vendors. You should be subscribed to their security bulletins. But you should also, whenever something like this gets announced, well, go check with the security researchers. Maybe you have a couple of favorites. I tend to say if Kevin Beaumont puts something out, I tend to read it immediately. There's a few of them out there done that way. But yeah, always take the time to check what the security researchers are saying, not just what might be the sanitized version that's making it through vendor communications.
Yeah, so I guess what we're saying here is, as well as software and hardware, both are never always going to be 100% secure out of the box. And I think that's kind of obvious to most, that these products are not going to be secure because someone's going to break it at some point. Maybe not now. It's the whole reason that Microsoft have to put updates out on basically a daily basis for their own operating systems. And that's the same with any third-party vendor you're going to use and their software. And it's also the same, unfortunately, with any security hardware or networking hardware that you're going to implement in any kind of environment. And that is kind of a channel that you can't ignore. And I think especially it's important, even when you're right from the beginning, I think it's probably easier to start your asset list when you've only got a few items to include in that. Not later down the line when you're sat there with like, oh my God, I've got 100 clients and multiple sites, and I can't remember if we have that switch installed in this building or whether it was a different model and whether it's affected or not. And that's when the panic starts, as you say. It's like, get those things sorted before it gets to that point. So would you have any kind of like advice or ways to build those asset lists, any software or?
Yeah. First is just, it is the challenge of whack-a-mole. There's always going to be more stuff's going to be popping up. How do I keep up with it? And it's depending on what your role is in an MSP. This is either that's just the job of help desk and the network engineers, and they're just supposed to be doing that. And then, but from their point of view, they're like, yeah, we would like to do that, but we do not have the time to do that. Just because we have access to these systems and we can spend the time to find this information. Yeah, it's like whenever Log4j came about, it's like, okay, here's a detection for it. Okay, which systems do we need to run this detection against? And it's like, oh, there's another 6 hours of you trying to figure out how to do that. So I think the biggest thing first is just realize there has to be just somewhere old school spreadsheet style outputs of these are the systems, here are the versions, here's the software on them. Just all of that information has to wind up somewhere, whether it is in a spreadsheet, whether it's in a MongoDB, whether it's in an asset management solution, a PSA, whatever it is. There has to be a centralized point of truth for you to go with. And depending on your size, there's going to be different ways of approaching it. But I would say, as nice as the asset information is that most of your RMM tools and even your network monitoring tools can bring in for you, them themselves are never going to hold enough of the information you need. So RMMs are a good first tool to start collecting asset information from environments, but that asset information needs to be getting dumped somewhere else in the centralized repository. So you wind up with, your RMM plus a network monitoring tool or a XDR or an NDR agent that's out there collecting information for you and dumping all that into one central location for you, whatever that ends up being. But don't think you're getting away with it with just one thing, and that being your RMM.
I guess following on from that, a lot of MSP owners listening might be thinking about regulation and whether we expect them to step in with stricter requirements around maybe vulnerability management or hardware retirement? Is it going to be a block for MSPs? Should they be doing it as best practice anyway? I guess they should.
You should already be doing it as a best practice because it just facilitates everything else. If you look at almost every single standard or cybersecurity framework, the first thing it always starts out with is assets and inventories, because you can't build everything else without knowing what's in the environment. And that goes not just for the equipment and the services and the software, but also the data. Because, well, what kind of data is it? How do we protect it? Where can it live? Where can it not be? Those are all things that, yes. And as regulations, we have NIS2 in the UK. We've got other ones coming up in the EU, UK, and in the US. New things happening in Australia. MSPs are not escaping scope, is kind of the way to put it. This is things that, yes, you should be doing it today for best practices, but you're probably going to be compelled sooner rather than later to start doing it.
I guess one of the other questions that might come out of that is, what would be the best approach for handling any equipment that's now known as legacy, that's no longer patchable, but in some environments it is still very mission critical?
Yeah. And there's always going to be things like, you have your manufacturers, your small widget makers, whatever. They got CNC machining, water jet cutters. They're still running Windows XP, Windows CE. You're always going to be like, yeah, well, those go over on a segmented network. And, yes, we're, still, ferrying over with USB keys to pop data in, stuff like that. There's always if it has to be there, that's fine. The business can make the decision that it needs to stay. But if the business decision of it needs to stay is going to be made, then you need to have the full accounting of what it is, why it's there, what it's being used for. If the company was to replace it, with a new modern solution, how much would it cost? How much would it cost us to simply put in mitigations, just so that all of the business decision justifications are there, and it never comes back that, IT or the MSP never said that this is a bad idea to keep this in production. Because at the end of the day, it's a business decision to be made, regardless of what the security impacts are going to be.
Yeah, completely. So just commenting on VPN vulnerabilities that we've seen, is there a risk that attackers are increasingly focusing on edge and VPN devices because they're often overlooked? We're seeing that a lot more this year, especially.
Yeah, so it's just been once something starts working, it starts getting attention and more people start trying it, and it becomes a feedback loop. So, the VPN vendors have weak secure software practices. Let's try, one security researcher sees something, POCs it, and then, threat actors start getting investigating it. And then all of a sudden, because of the research that the new security researchers are finding and the new threat actors are using, and then all of a sudden there's enough telemetry and indicators now that they figure out, oh no, wait, there's been nation state backed actors using this for the past year and a half. And it's this constant feedback loop of more and more attention going to it, because it is a viable attack path. It is a viable method to achieve your outcomes. And if something works, people will use it. The edge is, whether it's VPN or whether it is exposed ports, or, some type of unusual, if it's just rats, abusing some old PMP on some old routers that are still out there, whatever it may be, the edge is always a target for a threat actor to try and overcome, because usually once they overcome the edge, the inside of the network is soft and squishy. They can poke around and do whatever they want, and a lot of times, most environments will never know.
Yeah, so I guess just to follow on and finish off this topic, there's so many. We mentioned them already. There's so many like urgent security bulletins. How can IT and security teams actually prioritize effectively without totally burning out if they're covering such a wide landscape of technology?
So this is one of those for the MSP side, and for you as an IT professional, trying to, kind of getting the confidence in yourself to stand up and draw a line in the sand and say, look, this is my recommendation here. You do have to have the confidence. You have to have the knowledge, the experience to kind of just make the declaration about these things. And it is hard. It is absolutely hard, depending on what your role is, what your position is, how many years of experience you are.
How much budget you're given.
If you're only been in an IT for a year and you see something that's about to burst into flames, you warning about it is not going to carry the same weight as somebody that's been around for much longer, and it's just a natural consequence of it. But just in that broader sense of VPN, edge, compromise, whether it's physical systems, cloud systems, whatever it may be, wherever it may be, I think the biggest thing is getting to a point where you can say, we're going to standardize. We know you already have this equipment purchased. We know this capital expenditure has already been made, but we are going to either, one, charge you more to manage this thing that is not within our standard stack, or we're going to, all right, yeah, you got it, you purchased it, but you know what? Your extended support from the vendor is out in a year. So we're already going to start budgeting and planning for whenever that goes out. We're bringing you over to our stack. A lot of MSPs don't like that approach. They love we're boutique, we're white glove. We'll support what you have, and that is absolutely, take that as your starting approach, especially if you're a smaller team. You're not going to stroll in as a 3-man MSP and start throwing your weight around and expect to have every single client accept your terms that you're going to replace all of their equipment. So to make it easier for you to manage it. But as you grow, as you mature, that is absolutely what you should be heading towards, because if you don't, it makes it near impossible to scale and keep things secure.
Certainly, I think it also makes your team much more efficient if you then confine yourselves to certain requirements. And obviously, there's going to be some leniency there, but if you're on the whole part focusing on very specific set of even endpoint devices, networking equipment, and you stick with certain brands and certain things that you know how to configure securely, you know how to keep up to date, and you know what the risks are, you're subscribed to the right forums and bulletins for security updates, the MSP is then going to benefit from having a much more secure overall security posture by using your services. So I think that's quite a good approach to always stick to.
Yep. And one small thing there for anybody that's looking at this stuff and just looking at it thinking, man, this is huge. How do you keep this up and manage it at scale, especially in larger enterprises and in larger MSP environments? And it's always well, sometimes people don't. And the other is doing this at scale and efficiently and professionally. It's like, these are the things that are expected out of like fractional CISO and compliance programs to be able to do to and adhere to these kinds of things. Now, MSPs should still be doing them as a matter of best practice. Don't just wait for it to have to be done because of a compliance reason. But as an individual, don't look at it all and think, I should be expected to be able to handle all of this myself in my individual role. It's like, no. This is, the business has to be built out properly in order to deal with it.
Certainly. So I think that wraps up that section quite nicely. And I'm just going to go on for our UK listeners. If anyone like me is here in the UK, or offers services in the UK even, and you have some customers in the UK, there is something that they need to be acutely aware of that's pending implementation in 2026. And that is the UK Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill. Lewis, do you want to tell us a bit more about what this is and how it affects our MSPs?
Right. So this is an update to previous, legislation language that was and rules that were already out there. And it's being updated because, well, keeping with the times, but also honestly to maintain alignment with the NIS2 standard from the EU. These are, for all intents and purposes, these are considered to be sister, directives and sister legislative acts, because they're almost one for what they're asking. One of the main things that it's doing that we need to be concerned about as MSPs is it is expanding the scope of what is considered critical essential businesses in the UK to include MSPs. So now you are going to be within the crosshairs for not just the expectation that you should be following these things, but also you're now in the crosshair for you can get in trouble for not following these things. A few of the big things you need to know about and be aware of is one is requirements around reporting. That's going to be a big culture shift for a lot of MSPs and even internal IT. If you would otherwise be subject to this, is you're going to have very short windows to report things. So as an MSP, you're now going to be expected within 24 hours of an incident, providing an initial report about that incident, and then within 72 hours, file a full report. This is something that, if you haven't already been preparing for it, all of a sudden, you're now looking at a 2026 implementation dates for potentially, new capabilities, new processes, new procedures, new documentation, new tooling you're going to have to bring in to satisfy some of these things. You're going to have to change up, operations so you can facilitate proper collection of syslog and security events collection in a centralized location and retaining it appropriately. Automating, parsing that security event data through your choice, an XDR or whatever other platform, so that you're able to facilitate. Yeah, sure, we've got the security event and we have the appropriate information available that we need to go do a 24-hour window and a 72-hour window for reporting. And smaller MSPs, smaller IT teams, absolutely going to be a challenge. This is where partnerships are probably going to be a very good way of being able to handle and deal with this, whether it's an MSSP, whether it's a channel vendor that has a XDR, MDR solution like enables MDR offering, where you get that SIM. So you have that centralized collection of the event information. You have your XDR, so you have the ability to parse all of that information you're bringing in and storing from your cloud and from your endpoints, so you can respond to it quickly enough with either through the automations that the SOAR automations that the platform has to immediately lock down a user or disable endpoints. And then the 24/7 SOC, however you're facilitating those things, SIM, SOAR, XDR, 24/7 team of individuals to investigate and do initial triage and remediation. Those are all of the building block elements that you need so that you can hit a 24-hour reporting window and 72-hour reporting windows. Because without any of those things in play, it's always the respond with urgency, not panic. But if you don't have any of this stuff available to you, and one of your clients gets hit with ransomware and they themselves are an essential business, the clock is ticking and you can't figure out how you're going to approach it then. It really needs to be we already know how. We've already practiced it. We've already got the tools and things in place. And again, this is a Most MSPs should already be pursuing this out of a sense of, well, this is best practice and it's the best way of reducing liability, risk exposure, shrinking our attack surfaces, implementing proper risk management. It all goes into it. And we shouldn't be waiting for, as MSPs, you should not be waiting for the external pressures. Take advantage of the external pressures when it comes to the sales and marketing side of things, but don't wait on it for you to improve, as that being the reason why you need to improve your internal operations and capabilities.
Yeah, I think in my mind, in terms of asking firms and MSPs how to start preparing now, I would look at scoping, maybe auditing third parties, upgrading MDR, as we just mentioned, DIR and reporting systems. Is there anything for MSPs that maybe support critical sectors like health, energy, finance? What extra steps should they be taking immediately on the back of this new bill coming in?
So the biggest things is still going to be the reporting requirements. Is making sure that with these systems, with the business decisions that are being made, can we still adhere to this? Do we still have the methods, methodologies, the processes, the tooling in place? And do it as tabletops. Sit it down, and it'll be it's not going to be a 5-minute conversation. It's going to be a 2, 3, 4-hour process of doing an audit and gap assessments for all of these capabilities. And for if you are an MSP offering services to any of those more critically regulated entities, you absolutely should have a program built around that. You should have a GRC program or a BCISO or fractional CISO program that is either that you're working on or potentially implementing in the future for those types of clients, because that is that's what they need in order to contend with these new regulations. It's not just IT support that they need anymore. They need the compliance and regulatory assistance. And if you're not the person having that conversation with your clients, eventually somebody else is going to be having that conversation, at which point you lose control of the narrative and you're fighting to get your space in the conversation back. And that never, is something you want to avoid in the first place. Not that you can't come back from it, but it can unnecessarily cause complications, churn opportunities, and a bunch of other headaches. And also, it just represents an opportunity cost that's, to me, too large to not start doing these things. Because again, 15 years ago, patching, let me sell you an antivirus. Great. That's enough. And I don't have to worry about any of my competitors in the area. The MSP model is changed a lot since then. It's going to change a lot in the future. And a lot of those changes are going to be driven by compliance. You're not going to fight it. Time to get on board.
Yeah, I think the other question I would ask is, how prepared do you think maybe the average MSP or IT services firm is for these kind of new regulatory landscapes? And it kind of goes back into the conversation we last had, which is like the smaller companies that are just starting out as an MSP. How do they not get overwhelmed by loads of new frameworks and guidance and standards? How can they stay in the market and stay up to date with these things?
You have to, just make the realization of commoditization of services is a thing. There is, as an IT professional, as a tech geek, you're going to always take immense pride in, I can be put in front of a technical problem, and given the time, I can solve that technical problem. Yes, but you cannot, that does not make for good business practice. So for smaller MSPs, give up the idea that you're going to do it all yourself. Yeah. I think that's the biggest thing the best thing you can do for yourself. The best thing you can do for yourself is just suffer the ego death as quickly as you can admit that you're not going to be able to do all these things, and figure out how to build a business that can. And then, you start choosing your partnerships, and because what you're going to do as a small MSP more than anything is facilitate the delivery of services. Your clients are coming to you because they do not know how to facilitate those services in their environments. They're not coming to you because they want you to do all those things. They just want those services to happen. So find your MDR offerings, find your outsource opportunities, or your managed service security providers, or your outsource pen testing or vulnerability management services. You find them and build your services off of those, rather than trying to find the cheapest tool that would let you do it. Because that's another challenge for, whenever you're first getting started up, is you start focusing on, I need to find the cheapest tool to do the job, rather than I need to find the cheapest way of delivering the service.
Yeah, I think we're kind of seeing a wave of startup MSSPs entering the market. They kind of have a more agile, move fast mindset. A lot of them smaller teams. Many of them have a lot of important things to say about the cybersecurity industry and protecting breaches, maybe at a human level. Many of them are bypassing these regulatory alignments and basic frameworks that we're talking about, like CAF or Cyber Essentials. Is that kind of approach sustainable in a cyber resilience bill landscape, or are these providers setting themselves and their clients up for failure?
They're setting themselves up for some headaches. Not that they can't correct themselves as they learn the lessons as they go, because that's how the MSP channel and the business model has matured and evolved over the years. People, you learn fire bad. We don't do that anymore. And everybody else kind of gets, oh yeah, we saw how horrible that was. We're never going to do that ourselves. But yes, you absolutely could be setting yourself up for some troubles ahead. And then then how do we avoid that? How do we choose the frameworks? How do we decide what we're going to do? And I always do it off of, in the end, know that you're going to crosswalk multiple frameworks. Your goal in the end should be, I'm going to do something one way, but it's going to satisfy across 5, 6, 7, or 8 different frameworks. And that's not really that hard to do. All of the different frameworks aren't necessarily asking you to do different things. They're just asking you to do a certain set of actions out of a global collection of actions. There's nothing unique that they're asking for. There's nothing, revolutionary and impossible, and you've got to, do a paradigm shift of technology solutions to be able to figure it out. It's just like, no, they're all asking for a lot of very common things across all of them. Find a crosswalked map of all those compliances, and just take the time to say, yes, this is how we as an MSP are going to do this individual control. And then that satisfies across multiple ones. I encourage everybody to do it because, one, gap discovery, you get ideas faster, and it's not, you're not sitting there trying to come up with a good idea. It's, let me just go ahead and start doing all these things that we should be doing anyway. I can come up with my good ideas or our novel approaches or our new delivery of service later. Right now, let's just get the basics that everybody else agrees on are the basics in place.
Brilliant. So I think just to wrap up, again, some more news from the UK last week on the £440 million cyber attack on Marks and Spencer, Co-op and Harrods. This is something that I think hit the news in the US because it was such a widespread attack, and they've finally made 4 arrests. This is something that hit our retail sector so badly, and I think it is an example of, as we were talking about, third-party risk and mitigation strategies. And we were using Co-op as an example because they kind of pulled the plug before it's spread to anything, and they caused themselves their own disruption. That wasn't because of the attackers. They stopped their delivery and booking services, anything that stopped any data IO into their environment. They caused that themselves to stop this from getting any kind of data leakage or any situation worsening. And I wondered if you had anything to say on this or any comments on kind of the wider mentality of the retail sector, and is this something that we're going to see continue to happen?
Oh yeah, I mean it's always going to be things will happen where there is an opportunity for something to happen. And with them, I was, the fact that they pulled the plug basically. That is one of those things that a lot of enterprises, not a lot of businesses, SMBs ever sit down with the C-levels, with the presidents, with the owners, with the boards, and say, we need to have a articulable and well-defined trigger events for when we do pull the plug. Under what condition do we stop operations and no longer generate revenue? Because the answer can't be, well, we're never going to. No, there has to be an established plan, gate, multiple entry gates for it, multiple exits, but it all needs to be defined for at what point do these plugs get pulled. And it can't be, again, it's not an answer that the IT team or the MSP can come up with and dictate. The business itself has to make it. And with this, this was scattered spider for these. And there was 19, 17, 20-year-olds that were arrested. Yeah.
Yep.
And this just goes back to, well, they were using Dragon Force. I believe that's another ransomware as a service platform. But they, are still continuing their use of, social engineering, blackmail, all those other, tactics that they use to impersonate employees, calling in the help desk, the whole playbook of how can I convince the human on the other end of this transfer of information and data, whether it's via email or a phone call or vishing or phishing, whatever it may be, can I convince them to do my first step of the compromise for me? That is what they're good at. And, teenagers are social beings. And once they know and understand, they're going to be savvy in what feels like natural communication within their ecosystem with things they're familiar with. So it's their playground. This is not, they grew up with these types of communication technologies. And the ransomware as a service just offloads all the technical needs. It becomes no longer I have motivation and extensive technical knowledge. It's I have motivation and I happen to come across a influencer on TikTok that's selling access to, ransomware as an access camps or any of the other affiliate recruitment measures that they've got out there. So asymmetry of warfare is very much a thing. And this is a great thing to point at if you're an MSP or you're just in general trying to have that conversation with a decision maker that's being a little bit resistant about why do we need to do more things? Why should we be spending more money on IT and security? It's just point out the things that look, they have access to what only 3 years ago would have been considered nation state tools. They are attacking us with things that nobody would have expected us to have to defend you against 3 years ago. So it's in the hands of teenagers. It's in the hands of people that do not care, do not have the ability of knowing and understanding, consequences and repercussions really yet. But yet they've got access to toolings that can bring down entire sectors. They can bring down markets. They can cause impacts to financial sectors, to stock markets. And they are being, and they're actively being recruited. So, this is what, 3 individuals out. There's probably already 15 and 16-year-olds right now being recruited as replacements, for affiliate replacements. So
endless cycle. Well, we're just coming up on time here, Lewis. As always, it's been a pleasure to have you on, and I just thought you'd like to give our viewers a quick explanation of the Enable MDR product and a bit more about how they can contact you or anyone else at Enable if they're interested in any product.
So a lot of what we talked about today, especially with like the upcoming UK Cyber Resiliency Act improvement, mentioning of NIS2 if you're in the EU, all these types of attacks, the reporting requirements, all of these things are, this is a huge mountain. This is not, these are not molehills. They are mountains. If you are an individual or just a 2 or 3 person team required that are, has the delegated responsibility of dealing with these things, it's a challenge, hard to do. You're going to need tools. You're going to need, I don't want to say shortcuts, but you need things to already be figured out. Enable MDR, combining that in with our N-Central, our Insight platforms, there's a lot of benefits there. Vulnerability management. That's one of the big challenges in all of this stuff is you need to have an established vulnerability management program. We've got, application vulnerability detection within our unified endpoint management that's inside of N-Central and Insight. For Adlumin, there's we need to record all these events. Where are we going to put them? How are we going to afford to store these things? How are we going to afford to, upkeep that storage infrastructure? That's the first thing our MDR gives you is a SIM solution for all of those events. And you don't have to figure out how to set up something for it. You don't have to figure out how to write the SOAR detections for automating that a user should be locked out. You don't have to write the data science rules for how do I detect if a user is logging in underneath impossible travel. That's being handled for you inside of the platform. The biggest thing, or one of the bigger things, is 24/7. Just the simple fact of, do you have somebody that can respond to a detection of an event quickly enough? And no, having somebody on pager duty that's on call that's going to roll out of bed at 3 o'clock doesn't cut it anymore. We have to be, we're in a time and place where we have to respond in minutes. We can't respond in hours anymore. Things can't wait because a threat actor can go from initial access to an environment to lateral movement in an environment within 50 seconds. And they can be dropping malware payloads and ransomware payloads as soon as they're doing that. So, can't wait. You need something like an Enable's MDR offering powered by Adlumin. You need something that has that set of capabilities available to you to keep up with what's coming down the line. And anybody that wants to learn more, we'll have a link Ed can provide for that. But also you've got the opportunity of, if it's just, you want to talk and chew the security fat on cybersecurity, a specific compliance, reach out to me. Feel free to reach out to me directly, lewis.pope@n-able.com, or you can find me out on LinkedIn underneath the Security Pope. And also out on Twitch underneath the Security Pope. You might find me over there coding every once in a while. And don't hesitate, reach out. We're here to answer questions, again, whether it's about the products in our portfolio or just the challenges of security in general. I'm always open for having a conversation.
Wonderful. And thanks again, Lewis, for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for watching. We'll see you next time.
Pleasure as always.
Bye-bye. Lovely.